They'll be looking at what are some of the international trends, what are the best practices when it comes to managing data and the whole issue of open data, the democratizing of the sharing of information, etc. So without further ado, I hand you over to Barroca.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So during this panel, we will be discussing exactly some of the different perspectives that nowadays we can have towards what open data means and what we can do with open data, and also some of the different uses that have been identified and are increasingly being more trendy in different contexts. So we have a very diverse and rich panel with us here today. So, and I would tend to say that we can split this panel into sides. We have the supply side and the demand side of the data here. So to my left, I have Andrew Stott. Andrew Stott is a consultant to the World Bank on the topics of open data and strategies for governments in what means digital issues. He was the UK's first director for transparency, and Andrew contributed to the creation of data.gov.uk and established UK's national leadership on open government data. He still advises UK's government on open and digital issues, and he has issued last year to the World Bank his study of open data for economic growth. Then to his left we have Gonzalo. Gonzalo Iglesias is the Deputy Director of Open Government Office in Buenos Aires City Government, and he currently runs the city's government lab, which is a space designed to accelerate ideas that will serve as basis for the next generation of public policies and delivery strategies. This is quite a strong statement as well. Then we have Tracy. Tracy Hackshaw is the Deputy National CIO of the Ministry of Science and Technology. Tracy has been involved in the ICT scene in Trinidad and Tobago since 2005. He has had previous positions such as Team Lead and Chief Solution Architect at the INOTT, and he was the Senior Manager with responsibilities for e-government and ICT programs. And on the demand side, I would say, on the ones that suffer when they do not get data, we have also two distinct speakers. Ulrich from the Open Data Institute. Ulrich has over 7 years of practice in interpreting data. He's been leading research projects and consulting startups and governments on business cases for open data, and currently he leads the Startup Incubation Program at the ODI, supporting startups that are using open data as the basis of their business models. And finally we have Abdullahi Abdulkadri, I hope I said it right, from ECLAC. He's the coordinator of the Statistics and Social Development Unit of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, on the sub-regional headquarters for the Caribbean here in Port of Spain. He's also professor of economics at the University of West Indies. So, as you can see, it's a rich panel, and we will be having lots of different perspectives over this topic. But we will try to be as short as possible, because we want to engage with the audience to discuss with us, and we want to take this opportunity to have you discussing with us these topics. So I will start by Andrew, and since Andrew has been involved in these open data issues for many years, and with his first steps in the UK, but now we have all this international perspective that is brought also by your experience as a consultant. What do you foresee that will be the more explored issues on these topics of open data in the future?
Okay, well, I think just to give a bit of a survey of where we now stand. Compared to 2006, when this first came online, agenda, there's an awful lot now going on. around 50 countries have got some sort of open data initiative, plus there's some in the city and regional levels as well. So there's a lot more talk about it. There's a wide variation in quality and usefulness of the data being produced. There are some countries which are doing very well. There are some that are not doing so well. There's a lot of boring data being released that not even I can think of a useful application for. I found one data set released by a company that just had one number in it. And I can't see what the value of this would be at all. And there are lots of portals being, open data portals being created without regular refresh or addition of the data. One of my colleagues at the World Bank did a study of a series of open data portals which the bank has been involved with, and found out that the time the open data got refreshed on the portal was a few weeks before the World Bank mission team next visited. And that was the stimulus to action. And as you've seen recently, Kenya have relaunched their portal after 4 years, which was initially not very good, but they haven't really got the traction from that. And that having been said, what is heartening to see is the increasing emphasis on the economic benefits of open data and business incubation that goes with that. And governments across the board recognising that it's not just government's job to supply data, they've actually got to create the conditions for that to be used and incubate the businesses and assist businesses in that. We've seen programs, the series of Open Data 500 programs now, which started in the US, and I think it's being done in Korea, and in Mexico, and in Australia. It seems to be a growing trend of actually cataloguing how businesses are using the data. And there are some growing examples of business use. I've been struck by how in the last 6 years of giving presentations about open data, I started with a presentation that was entirely theory. Then I went to a series of presentations which were about what other consultants said about the value of open data. And now I can start feeding in examples of what open data has achieved. And one of the interesting things, and I think this is very relevant for the Caribbean, is that in North America, Western Europe, we tend to think about open data applications in parts of the economy that are important to those economies. And yet when you look at Africa, which like we're in the Caribbean, and there's some examples in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, it's also starting to come out. Agricultural data is very important, and that can actually make a significant impact on the income of farmers. And that has a powerful effect that different sectors are more important to other countries. By contrast to that, there's probably a disappointing lack of evidence about tangible benefits of transparency for its own sake. A lot of the early activists on open data were about transparency. And apart from some well-known examples, not least in Argentina, with the work of Buenos on bus subsidies and on Argentinian Senate expenses, where they've got tangible results and resignations, and a bit in Canada as well. We haven't been getting so many of those examples coming through, and that's a bit surprising. Perhaps it is that the right data isn't being released yet that allows sufficient granularity to get to that. But going forward, I see the movement has now got some momentum. There's good examples of great practice out there, both in supply of data and in the use of that. And so there should be much more confidence for others taking forward over the initiative now.
Great, thank you very much. Because in fact, we have as many trends as we have a number of challenges on open data, and I think all trending topics. We have the political will that initiates the ideas of opening the data, but then we have all the maintenance and the community management activities that we can put forward. And Gonzalo comes from Buenos Aires. Personally, it's the story of open government in Buenos Aires is one of the ones that I find most interesting, and I'm really a passionate fan of what they're doing there. And we were discussing yesterday the most recent evolution of open data in Buenos Aires, which is the implementation of open data sensors platform in the city. Do you want to share with us the story of Buenos Aires up to this point, and how you now believe that opening sensors data from sensors could be a project that could generate a higher impact in the near future, and why you invested?
Absolutely, thank you, Jim. For going to that, I have to correct you. You have divided this table between the demand side and the supply side of the open data, and I think I would like try to make it very clear yesterday that open data teams are probably better, perceived better. They work better if they are self-perceived as brokers, brokers between the demand and the supply side. So we feel like that. We act basically like that. We are the people who is like the broker between the civic innovators outside government, okay, with La Nación, for example, La Nación Data, and our colleagues in government. So that's our real job. But thank you for bringing the real-time data issue to the table, because that's Buenos Aires has been. We are trying, starting to migrate our strategy, our capabilities, our systems to basically to deal with the growing size of the flooding of real-time data coming out of human sensors. All right. But also from our transactional services, like 311, for example, which can be perceived like as a sensor, basically trying to perceive what's going on out there in the city. So the implications of this strategic movement from static data to real-time data, I think, represents incredible opportunities, and it's also basically a problem for teams working with open data. This is particularly true for cities, where sensors are becoming rapidly like the main source of data. Even more than transactional services. Think about it for a minute. Like just one sensor, just one U1 environmental station will generate or generates more data in 1 month than the information we have stored in our open data catalog in 4 years. All right. So over the last 2 or 3 years has been an incredible explosion in Buenos Aires in the number of municipal sensor networks and sensors itself, and ranging from the street lights, which are now basically a sensor, to traffic lights, to environmental stations, and so on. So, but that growth in the number of sensors and the data coming out of sensors, we don't have like a similar move in our capacities to deal with that information. All right. So we see that information like it's a group, but we cannot make sense of that information. And that's again a very I think that's an incredible opportunity, particularly for open data teams. We open data teams, we are like very used to work with static files, not with streams of data. All right. So for the last 6 months now, we have like tried to rebuild basically our systems to start dealing with sensors, not to make the information in sensors closed again, like what happened with other transactional services, but try to design information from the beginning to be open, free. All right. So it's gonna be, I think we can like talk for hours on this because it's as much a technical issue as a political problem. It's gonna be incredibly hard to deal with this new type of information, but I think Buenos Aires is ready to go.
Okay, thank you very much. It's amazing how these issues evolve and how you start thinking about open data as open whatever you have. And then you start getting the attention of the community and the attention of policymakers. And then it's as you said, you're acting as brokers because the demand side is not actually requesting so much data that it's now big data, that big open data that we are thinking about. And one of the trends, perhaps we will be discussing during this panel, is the idea of all government data being open by default. So open government data means open data, and the end of the discussion of open data once and for all, which could be even more interesting. But then we have here in Trinidad and Tobago the banks supporting the first steps of an open data strategy, and we have one of the actors of this strategy, which is Tracy. And Tracy, you have been involved for a long time in the ICT scene here in Trinidad and Tobago, but you have now the responsibility of leading the technical side of these open data movements and the first steps of the open data revolution, I would say, in Trinidad and Tobago. What kind of challenges do you see in this? Do you see yourself in the role that Gonzalo was talking about as being a broker between supply and demand? This meaning that you need to be an evangelist next to your colleagues in government to bring data sets into the platform. How do you see your role at this stage, and what are the challenges?
Yes, thank you very much. And I like the phrasing of it being a political and a technical issue, because even though in Trinidad and Tobago we are starting an open data initiative, the drive has always been to a technical solution to the problem for several years, but the political will has never been there. But since we've had a drive towards transparency and accountability across all levels of government, even the open government, as we were mentioned, initiative that has been started in the US through OGP, I as a point towards developing countries in particular, about what they are doing in terms of their own issues related to data, and the technical people are being called upon now to assist. So while we have procurement reform, we have integrity type initiatives, there's also the data revolution science we mentioned. And I would say that from a really, I guess, another side of Buenos Aires, where we're now starting off trying to understand exactly what's happening. And the World Bank has assisting us successfully thus far. From where we sit, I think we're in a nascent developing world social problem construct where we see it as potentially solving social problems. And the whole, even the big data concept, as you mentioned, where crime and climate change and disaster preparedness issues are haunting islands like ourselves. But there's a lot of data to support that move forward in terms of predicting or proactively treating with those issues. So that's if you're looking at trends, that's one of the things that I think in the developing world that we see open data primarily from a government perspective, as also assisting us in moving that agenda forward. And the realization of within government, you cannot yourself do it on your own. So perhaps assistance from the community or the citizenry or the world, as the case may be, to help us predict and rapidly deal with that issue. Another area that I think that has really came up or has been, I guess, haunting governments recently is what I call the Snowdenism situation. So since Snowden and the NSA issue arose, a lot of things have been start pointing at the data sets that you have, and what is being made available, and what is open, what is closed data. And many of the developing countries are still struggling with data classification as an issue. So the question of what is open and how do you begin the process of thinking, and then as you said, all needs to be free and open to start, is a real challenge, not just for the technical people, because we are there to help, but certainly in terms of the policymakers. How do you begin that process of determining what is free and open and what is to be delivered? That affects your open data strategy significantly. And the challenge we're facing internally in Trinidad is determining what do we open, how do you open it, and how much do you open. Things like that, which are, I guess, shades of gray of the actual concept. And as we referred from Vincent recently, the concept of privacy itself has changed over time, and social media in particular becoming an issue. And the citizens and I guess the people who need to provide fund have different views of privacy now. And as a government, you have to be responsible in terms of how you treat that issue. But people are themselves going to put data elsewhere. That's where they have to government, they'll give it to Facebook, give it to Google, but they won't give it to you. And you're grappling with that kind of situation where the data that's available to a Facebook or to a Google or to a Microsoft may be more rich and more useful than data that you yourself have in government. That's another challenge that we're grappling with, another trend I see happening in that space where you may have to mix and do a lot of mashups with private data models that exist out there. And I guess lastly, I would say that, of course, I haven't really mentioned yet, but the app economy, which has arisen since 2011, maybe, where everybody wants to do an app. I mean, that's the thing now. It's an app for everything. But yes, yeah, an app for everything, but within that, there can be very useful and meaningful solutions being built. And that requires data. And government, as I said in the first point, is slowly but surely realizing that the app economy gives them an opportunity to actually solve a social problem that they themselves cannot solve. So I think for a developing country, and especially the time has come now, where it's a perfect storm. So the consumers of data, the producers of data, and the facilitators of data, including the app developers, are all in a stage where I believe we can really see, at least from where we sit, whether the producer of a data portal can be used immediately and the feedback will come immediately and the data is bad or good or whatever. So I think that's a new thing that may be happening now that we have not been happening up to 5 years ago. So that's another trend I see occurring that we need to deal with.
Thank you very much. And actually, thank you for this last point, because it perfectly fits with the question I had prepared for Ulrich. This is exactly, Ulrich, you had on your work on the Data Institute, you have a difficult role, I would say, of proving the theories about the potential of open data for businesses, right? Which is at the same time, I would say, an amazing job. It's bringing all these entrepreneurs and the right ideas and supporting them into proving a concept that has not yet been proved. Is the data economy the same thing as the app economy? Are we talking about new trends that you see on the startups that you're supporting, on ways of using data that can benefit their businesses, but also society? What kind of trends do you see happening nowadays?
Yeah, thanks, John. There's a great thought that goes, you cannot predict the future, so you have to look at the present. So I've been with the Open Data Institute since very early 2013, and I thought it might be worth to give you a very fast time lapse of some of the open data things that happened. So Andrew has mentioned a few of them. At the beginning, there were initiatives and activities that weren't really called open data, like Wikipedia or OpenStreetMap, but they very much fall into that. And I think so. The ODI was founded then, really started in 2012, and where I think we really saw things taking on a slightly different level was in 2013, which saw the G8 Open Data Charter, which promotes this idea of open by default. We saw McKinsey put out a report, telling the world that open data is worth trillions of dollars. And we saw some great examples from the business world where companies got sold for staggering amounts of open data, staggering amounts of money that worked with open data. In 2014, it was another round of the Open Data Barometer. So if you want to really understand where we are globally in terms of open data, it's a great place to learn more. And the UN, talks about the data revolution and looks at what comes after the Millennium Development Goals. And in 2015, as examples from the commercial open data community, we have the Open Data Incubator for Europe, another European project that really, so there's 5.5 million euros allocated to startups and SMEs in Europe that work with open data. So it's and these grants are giving out without interest rates or without the remit to pay them back, and even without equity stakes. A lot of people start talking recently around ecosystems with or without quotes, and then also we really like to shape the thinking around closed, shared, and open for the future, just so we can anticipate these issues that people confuse personal information with open data and so forth. So as a concept, distinguishing between closed, shared, and open really helps. Going forward, I would say we will see a lot more around data infrastructure. No one quite knows what that means, but for example, centralized geospatial data set is certainly on those lines. And in very simple terms, I would say we've moved from the publishing part, just put it out there, have a data portal, to the use. How can it really stimulate an impact, be that social, environmental, or economic? And I will stop here because I'm really interested to hear from the people in the audience later on.
Okay, thank you very much. We've talked about several times about on the topic of data revolution, and we were talking also about big data and the usage for business, but there's also the usage of big data and open data for accountability. And in that sense, the national boards of statistics will have an important role. And Abdullahi, who's here with us today, can perhaps share his thoughts with us about this idea of how big data and open data will change the game of the role of the national statistics boards, and what are the main challenges and opportunities that are created by this new trend.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I will be following, just adding to what my co-presenters have presented, but focusing a little bit different on a slightly different issue, which is the big data aspect of the open data initiative. We've had Ulrich mentioned the issue of data revolution, and the United Nations has actually been one of those organizations pushing for the data revolution, and in this case in particular for data revolution for sustainable development, which in essence has two main components: making data open and also taking advantage of the big data. And it's quite interesting to hear the case of the Buenos Aires situation in which they are looking at making censuses more accessible. And when you look at the Caribbean situation, we have censuses every 10 years, but hardly will you have access to the census data. Even when the reports are made, what you find is that you have summary statistics of the reports, but you can't really get access to the census data. We know there are issues of privacy and there are issues of confidentiality that have to do with censuses or surveys that are done in the public domain. But there are ways also of maintaining privacy, and the issue of privacy has come up in expanding already. And ECLAC, which is the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, we have actually been pushing for more openness in terms of data sharing. And we have a software which we have been promoting to the National Statistical Offices, which is called Moderator. And there will be a workshop on that tomorrow at the morning session. And what that does is to address the issue of, the concerns about anonymization of data or the privacy of those who are giving data to the National Statistical Offices. What this does is actually to give people access to the database so that you can query the database without necessarily having the data yourself. So this is one area of moving from what Ulrich mentioned about being closed to being shared and then gradually being open. So we've been supporting the issue of openness of data, or open data. But what we have seen is that in the Caribbean, we are renowned for being a data poor region. And the reality is that we are not as poor as we want to be in terms of data. We have data, only that we do not provide access to this data. There are many reports that you find, or many government programs, the national development programs of quite a number of nations. When you look at them, you tend to wonder what are the evidence base, the evidence base for making some of the projections that are being made. And you see that there are government agencies that produce data, that use data, but they don't necessarily have access to the data produced by other agencies. So when we have open data platform, that enhances data sharing such that you don't necessarily have to know somebody who knows someone in an office before you get access to data that should be available in the public domain anyway. So that's one of the things that we are trying to support, that government, especially the National Statistical Offices, should make data available. Of course, taking due cognizance of the issue of privacy, making sure that there is no privacy, there is no risk of identifying persons when the data should be anonymized such that it's only those unidentifiable characteristics that will be made accessible publicly. But now going back to the issue of data recognition, we have the open data and we have the big data. And one of the reasons why we have this revolution going on is that when you look at the Millennium Development Goals, the monitoring of this MDG has been quite challenging for most nations. For example, the MDG has 8 goals and 16 indicators. And when you look at the reporting of nations, the region has not done very well. You have 16 indicators, and each of these indicators will have one or more targets that are being reported or that are supposed to be reported on. When you look at the reporting, and we look at the data from the MDG Millennium Indicators, where you look at from 2005 to 2010 and 2013, what we observe is that the Caribbean, on average, actually performed better in 2005 in terms of reporting than 2013, and performed better in 2010, and performed better in 2010 than in 2013. So what that implies is that there is a long lag in making data available. So are we to believe that we are worse off in terms of having data production in 2005 than in 2013? I don't want to believe that. But it's just that we don't share the data. So it takes a long time for the data to be made available for those who actually need this data. So one of the initiatives that we are pushing for in the at ECLAC is actually to start looking at big data. And this is in line with the UN, several UN initiatives that if we have data that are not necessarily produced by the government, but which could be useful in supporting development efforts, why don't we look into this? And this is where we now have to look at the challenges of big data, as well as the opportunities of big data. And this will involve quite a number of issues which hopefully we'll get to talk about subsequently in this panel.